Hey everybody, welcome. I am so thrilled that you are here. Well, if you've been following me, then you know by now that my newest book, Assignment Complete, Caregiving, Loss, and Learning to Live Again, is out. And I am so excited. I am overwhelmed by the support and so grateful for everything that you all have done, shared, you have purchased. So from the bottom of my heart, I want to say thank you. So tonight is actually going to be a little bit different. We're going to have a conversation. Assignment complete, the conversation. And I am so excited to have with me tonight a special guest, the Walter Allen Brickhouse. Welcome, Walter.
Thank you so much, Gwen. It is certainly a delight to be here, and I'm excited. When you first called, the excitement, I could hardly contain it, and I'm looking forward to tonight. I really am.
Awesome.
And this is going to be, it will be a conversation.
Yes.
And it's going to be a delightful conversation. And so I'm going to encourage you to settle in, get whatever you need to get in, get your drink, get your snacks and what have you, and let's enjoy this journey together.
You know, I want to go back for just a moment to something that you said. You know, even though this topic is heavy, he talked about how this would be a delightful conversation. And so even in the book, I talk about how you have to find joy. You have to find moments to celebrate even in the midst of the tough time. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that as we have our conversation tonight. Also, the other part of the book talks about learning to live again, because you've given your life fully, in so many cases, to caregiving until you're really learning how to live again once it's over. And so I want Walter to tell you a little bit about what he is doing now after his caregiving days, and then he's going to take us on into the conversation.
Gwen, it's interesting that you said how to live again because I struggled with the fact that after taking care of Linda for 3 to 4 years, that I didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
And so later on, what I did was is that I went on and got my master's in child and adolescent psychology, and that led me to teaching at 4 schools at the same time
Wow.
for in higher ed, and I was teaching a variety of psychology courses,
Yeah.
and of course I was teaching those courses, and then what happened was is that I'm teaching these courses. I should seek to become a counselor or therapist.
Yeah.
And so I went back to school and got a
Wow.
master's um, in clinical mental health counseling and currently working on my doctorate in clinical psychology. However, and that is,
Yeah.
and sometimes I say to myself, are you doing this for others or are you doing this for yourself? A little bit of
But
both.
little bit of both.
But I really want to get into your when did you decide that you needed to write this book?
Well, really, it wasn't me deciding that I would actually write the book. One of the things that I talk about in the book, and it opens with me talking about silence. And so after mom's passing, of course, you go into crisis mode. When we were working, we were getting everything together for her service. And then I come back home and I'm away from the house, I'm away from my family, and I'm sitting and there is this silence that I'm now dealing with. I spent probably the first week and a half just sitting, looking at pictures of mom, watching videos so that I could hear her voice, because there was just so much silence. And so I began to write. And I'm an introvert, and so I can't always, get the words right out, but I'm going to get a piece of paper and start to write. And that writing turned into assignment complete.
One of the things, as a clinician, one of the things I encourage clients is to write
Yeah,
because sometimes they can't express themselves verbally, but
absolutely.
writing is very therapeutic. And certainly after the situation with your mom, that one of the things to do
Yeah.
is, and it also helps the grieving process.
Oh,
Uh,
absolutely.
was there a specific moment during caregiving where you knew this experience was going to change you?
Whew, a specific moment. In the beginning, and I talk about this in the book, in the beginning, it really was helping. Even after we started to be there as live-in caregivers, it really still felt like helping because, both mom and dad were still active. They required us being there because they didn't need to be alone, but it still only felt like helping in that particular situation. But I talk about how often there's usually something that triggers where you know that this has really now changed from helping to caregiving. And I talk about an incident in the book that happened with mom. And so it was really at that moment that I knew that we were in the full caregiving mode. Um, and I'll go into it a little bit here. It may come up again later, but mom was at home, and really this was before we were actually there. Now that I'm thinking about it, it was before we were actually there living in, and so mom had a moment late in the evening of disorientation where she woke up out of her sleep and felt that she had to get out of the house. And so she was able to get out. My dad heard her. Fortunately, he was still mobile at that time. Went outside, looked, did not see her, alerted our neighbor who always looked out for our parents. So grateful for them. And so they called 911. And fortunately, there was a highway patrolman nearby, and he was able to get to her quickly. And I am eternally grateful because that's a busy highway. It could have been another way. but God had it so that with my dad's help and our neighbors, and then the highway patrolman being there, that she was able to get to safety.
Oh,
And so at that point, we knew that we could not leave them alone.
and you talk about in the book, and we will go more into that because I think that one of the things that happens is that people don't
Yeah.
realize that they are transitioning from
Yes.
helping to become a
Oh,
caregiver.
absolutely.
And I want you to talk more about that.
Okay.
Um, you talk about caregiving finds you. And when I say finds you, it could
Yeah.
be anybody. When did you realize you were no longer just helping, but really caregiving?
And that incident that I mentioned was the primary thing. But we also, even before that, there were things that were changing little by little. It may have started out where, and for example, mom knew that she was starting to forget some things. And so what I would do is I set up so that emails would come to me. And I would know when she needed to take care of her bills. And so I could say, Mom, write the check to such and such. Or, Mom, make sure that you remember to do XYZ. Ultimately, it got to a point where I started to write the checks and Mom would sign and then they could go out. And so, gradually you start to see some things that are changing. You still, in many instances, don't think of it as caregiving. It's just I'm helping someone who took care of me who now needs a little bit more help. And so I'm here to do whatever it is that you need.
Okay. Um, was it difficult for you to transition from being helping? Here you're writing the checks and what have you, and also there's a part of you possibly noticing that mom is slowing down, or so you're having to do things. So was that difficult for you
Mm-hmm.
to transition from helping to caregiving? Because here you are, you're the daughter
Yeah.
and she's the parent,
Mm-hmm.
and now you're having to become
Yeah.
the parent. So what was that like for you?
In terms of it being difficult to help, helping was not difficult for me.
Okay.
I love my parents and anything that I can do, to make life better for them. I always want to do. So that part of it was not difficult.
Okay.
What was difficult was as I continued to see changes, when I began to see someone who was very different from who I had been accustomed to. As I think through this, and there's another kind of a triggering event, if you will, when mom lost her best buddy, Aunt Dell, and of course, all of the sisters are close. But mom and Aunt Dell did some things together that, some of the other sisters didn't do. They traveled, they went fishing, things of that nature. And when Aunt Dell passed, mom was never the same. And so we really started to see, her just kind of withdraw from things that she had always enjoyed, and just didn't want to do a whole lot. And so that was difficult to do and to see.
As you were talking, I began to think that, here I had sent Linda some roses for Valentine's Day, and then I get a call that she's in the hospital, and they have done a code blue on her,
Wow.
and it was like, wow,
Yeah.
here, all of a sudden, you're talking to this person, they're healthy and what have you,
Yeah.
and now there's a code blue, and she goes into a coma, and it was, I mean, I'm almost helpless because of the
Yeah.
fact that she was in the hospital, and there was not a whole lot that I could do but
Yeah.
just be there. Gwen, at the time that Linda was taken to the hospital, we had been married for like 30 years.
Wow.
And so we had, we have two adult daughters, and at that time we had two or three grandchildren. And it was just a shock to get the phone call. Linda was in Virginia with two of my daughters and granddaughters, and I was in Texas. My daughter calls and says, they're not giving her long to live, and so all of these thoughts are going into my mind, and so I'm there. However, what I'd like to ask you is, what do you? how do you, and I didn't know I was going to become a caregiver, you know,
Right.
because
Yeah.
the information I got was by the time I got there, she would not be
Oh,
alive.
she would be.
So I wasn't even thinking about caregiving. I was
Mm-hmm.
thinking about let me get there.
Mm-hmm.
But what would you say to people who are in that in between stage? They're in between helping and they're in between caregiving. What would you say to them?
So, for those who are in that in between stage between helping and caregiving, what I would say to you is it really ties into why I'm doing this because I think that so often people don't recognize. And, one of the things I say in the book was, had you mentioned caregiving to me, 10 years before some of this came up, I wouldn't even think that it would apply to me because, my parents are pretty active and pretty healthy and they're going about their lives. And I've not had an experience where, even with my grandparents, that I had to be a long-term caregiver or even saw it. And so it wasn't on my radar. So a part of the reason for me really doing this and talking about it at the level of detail that I am is so that it raises awareness. And especially as people are living longer, then we're going to encounter some things probably with our family members and our loved ones that were not on our radar. So I would say to really be paying attention. Don't just dismiss things that you see as just normal aging. Because it's not always that case. It can be, and maybe it's not. And so there are a few things that I talk about. Some of the things that we ultimately saw, some of it could be related to things like having a UTI infection or being dehydrated. So it's something temporary. And if we're paying attention, then we can get them the care that they need, and then we're able to move on. But we also don't want to just dismiss it around things associated with aging because it could also be a sign of something greater. And for us, for a long time, it wasn't necessarily that, but then it began to progress into that, to where we started to see and to hear medical professionals talk about cognitive decline. And ultimately, they also brought in dementia. And so then that's a whole nother level. And caregiving started to progress and started to change as those different diagnoses came. So pay attention. If I
Yeah.
had to say one thing, pay attention. Do not dismiss what you see.
I'm glad you said that because one of the things that I was thinking about is that if we're not paying attention, then we miss some significant,
Significant.
some significant behaviors.
And just on that before you leave, one of the things that really concerns me, and I find myself praying about it a lot, is again, as we see people growing older, one of the other things that I see, and it grieves me every time I see it, is we see a lot of headlines about senior citizens who are missing. They walk away from their families. Sometimes there's a known diagnosis, sometimes there isn't. And so, again, it's so important to make sure that we pay attention and we don't dismiss. And even if we're not seeing signs, stay close. Again, because it literally grieves my heart. Things can change, in just an instant. So we want to stay close and we want to love on and we really do want to care for our seniors.
You mentioned paying attention, and particularly when the individual starts slowing down, and when they walk away and missing. What are some other things about caregiving that people don't fully understand until they are in it?
Whew, things that people don't fully understand. And I'll talk a little bit more about some of the things that we see.
Okay.
And I've already talked about how, mom kind of pulled back some. She changed. Sometimes it's them forgetting to eat. Sometimes their bathing habits may change. And these things are oftentimes signs that, we have to pay attention to. Missed medication doses, Or there might be an instance when, there are more doctor's appointments. So there's a whole range of things, and probably some that people are experiencing that we didn't experience and I can't speak to. But those are just some of the things that I can think of off of the top of my head.
One of the things that I had to pay attention to was is that when I first started taking care of Linda, she was on 23 different medications,
Yeah. Wow.
which, I didn't know that before. And so what happened was, I don't know what prompted me
Yeah.
to go to the physicians, the PDR, physician's desk reference, and to look up each one of those medications. And I discovered that there were 10 of her medications counteracting the other
Wow.
13 or 14, which means that they weren't doing any good.
Yeah.
She was taking 24 pills, but they were not helping her.
Yeah.
And I think many times what happens is that that's something, even now, even before you get into the caretaking mode, when you have someone who's taking medication,
Learn.
look it up with them together,
Yeah.
so that you know that, oh, well, I'm taking these 5 pills, but only 2 of them are really only doing
Yeah.
the job.
Yeah, and that's a really important one. And, on that note, I'll mention this. One of the things, based on the experience that I had personally after my knee surgery, that someone told me is that a pharmacist can be one of your greatest
Yes, yes,
help
yep.
when it comes to medication, because they can look at things that you have been prescribed and tell you about how they will interact with each other. And it was something that I didn't know. And so it's important to maybe find maybe a local pharmacist, or to build that relationship with the pharmacists at these big box stores, so that you can ask those questions. I used to get really irritated when they wouldn't give you a prescription until you went for that counsel.
That's right.
But now I understand it
Yep.
much better. And
Yep.
so, great point that you made. And then I thought of a couple of other things. Sleep habits can change. And
yeah,
so,
definitely.
if they're sleeping a lot,
Yeah.
or they're not getting enough sleep, and so at night, and they're sleeping a lot during the day. So that could also be an indication that there's something that's happening as well with your loved one. So really wanting again to just pay attention to things that normally we would miss, but hopefully and prayerfully this conversation helps you understand that these are things that you really should be paying attention to.
Yeah. And I'm going to move on. However, what about those individuals that they're working, that they have small children, or they have teenage children? What about those individuals who may not be able to pay as much attention because they've got their lives that's full over here, but they know that there's something not quite there with mom or dad? What would you have for those individuals? What kind of
Yeah, and it's a great question. And one of the things that I mentioned in the book is usually it's going to be the one who has the greatest proximity to your loved one, your parent, whoever, who's going to pay attention or to see things probably before others. Sometimes there are some who are single, they don't have a family, or whatever the case may be. And so they may be the one. In our case, my sister ended up getting a job there in the city where my parents lived. And so she was with them during the course of the week. And so that's how a little bit of it started, where, it would be, I'm not sure if this is something, but have you noticed? Or, I noticed such and such. And so it's important for everybody to be paying attention at some level. And, the one with smaller children or who's away might not see as much, but for the ones who are there to share that information. Because what I've found is oftentimes once information is shared, it triggers other thoughts and memories about things that you have seen. And so that's what I would say as it relates to that.
Yeah. Okay.
And those conversations are important.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the exhaustion that the
Yes.
caregiver experiences. both physically and emotionally and even spiritually. What is that like? What was that like for you?
Whew. Caregiving, while it is such a rewarding experience in many ways, it is also a very demanding experience, and especially as it progresses. There were times when mom was up for basically a 24-hour period, and you really didn't get any sleep. And so I've been up all day, and then now when she's had dinner, and we think we're going down for the night, that's not happening. And we've talked a lot about mom because her passing really triggered the book for us. But again, we took care of two parents, both of whom were in their 90s. Daddy left us in 2024, and then mom in 2026. And so their sleep patterns. Dad was the same way. He slept during the day and he was up at night. And so oftentimes we found ourselves up at night, which means that, you're up during the day, you're cooking, you're cleaning, you're taking care of responsibilities, but then you're also not getting sleep at night. And so there is a level of exhaustion. And then you have to figure out ways that you're going to make it work for you. Ultimately, we ended up kind of trying to pair up so that we could share. But, before we did those things, one of the things that I did was whenever they did nap, I tried to get me a nap as well. We had baby monitors, so if they called or if I heard movement, then, I could get up and go and check on them. But I tried to make sure that I would rest
Yeah.
whenever they rested. And then whenever I came home, which ultimately after daddy's passing, I was able to do that a little bit more, not as much when they were both still living. But when I came home, there wasn't a lot that I would just spend my time doing. I would make sure that I could get some rest so that I would be what I needed to be once I was back with them to care for them. So, there's the physical, emotional, you're up and down. Like some days they were doing well, and then, at the snap of a finger, we could be at the emergency room, or something happens. And so there's just this emotional roller coaster that you're on. And, the fear that goes along with that, even the exhaustion that goes along with it, because it takes a lot out of you. And, I remember situations where with both mom and with dad, when I was by myself, we had an emergency. And so I'm having to deal with the emergency and still trying to, in one situation, I was bathing mom and she just slumped. So, here I am, I'm trying to deal with that. I'm trying to call 911. I'm trying to call sisters, and you got to stay calm in the midst of it on the outside, but inside, you've got all kinds of things going on, so there's that. And then when you're caregiving, there are just some things that you don't get to do that you were accustomed to doing. Miss church sometimes. And so, tried to do as much as I could online. And then, to find moments where, I could be quiet and I could be still and I could read the word. And it might just be one verse, but you get in what you can get in.
One of the things that one of Linda's doctors, she had 12. One of the doctors said, you gotta take
You have to.
an afternoon or an evening, and he said, don't come to the hospital.
Yeah.
Just you gotta take care of you, because if you don't take care of you, then
You can't take care of
I
them.
can't take care of them. And I was blessed because she slept throughout the night, and so it wasn't like that I was up all night with her and what have you. During the day, even though the job that where I was, they allowed me to work from home. But I was blessed to have a caretaker to come in. Matter of fact, there were 3 of her former nurses at the
Okay.
hospital, and they rotated throughout the 7 days
Yeah.
But
Awesome.
I was always on
Mm-hmm.
alert. Even though
Yeah.
they were there, they were nurses and they knew Linda and what have you.
Mm-hmm.
I was on alert because if I
Oh,
heard
yeah.
something drop, or if I heard
Mm-hmm.
a sigh, I was down. I was down
Yes.
those stairs.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean,
Whew.
you're up there,
Yeah.
and you don't come down until you can come down, and
You
that may be months
you
and
don't.
months later.
Yeah. You mentioned the word alert, and it brought back something that I said even in the book. It's
Hmm.
like, I lived my life, and, going back to the silence, I
Hmm.
had lived on alert. Even when I was home, I was still on alert. If that doorbell rang at a certain time of the night, because I had it connected to my phone,
Hmm.
then I was going to be like, what's going on?
Yep. Yep.
Something's not right. What's happening? So you are on alert. And then you mentioned caregivers, and that triggered another thought. And, as it relates to, being able to find ways to rest, we were able to have some services from caregivers through a grant that we received.
Mm.
And so I wanted to go back to that because
Okay.
oftentimes people don't know that there are resources out there that you can tap into. But if you're watching me and you need some support, then you want to try your area agency on aging and see if there are caregiver grants that you can apply for and get the help and the support that you need. Respite
Mm.
services,
Hmm.
for especially for someone who is under hospice care. There's respite services that you can tap into. And so again, to the point that you made about how important it is to take care of yourself, to take care of your health. I didn't miss my doctor's appointments.
Mm.
I made sure that I got my checkups because those things are important. So find resources in your community that will help you to do what it is that you need to do.
You talk about in the book about being seen,
Hmm.
uh,
Yeah.
because what happens is that we are focused on caring
Yeah.
for that individual,
Absolutely.
and it is, you have friends and family, what have
Hmm.
you, and they may check in every now and then,
Yeah.
but it's almost like you're walking this journey
Hmm.
solely by
Yeah.
yourself. So you talk about in the book about being seen.
Hmm.
Talk more about that.
Yeah. Whew, that's a huge one because, for my siblings and I, there are 7 of us living, and, we all shared at some level in the caregiving. And even in that, it could still feel lonely because, again, when we started out, we had a week at a time
Hmm.
where,
Hmm.
one was coming and one was going. And then, it eventually got to where we were there together, but you do start to feel a little bit alone and isolated.
Mm.
And one of the things I talked about was sleeping habits. And so there were periods of time when mom slept, I mean, almost like 24 hours.
Hmm.
And I learned whenever she wanted to sleep, not to disturb her.
Hmm.
And so I couldn't go anywhere. I had to be present,
Hmm.
but especially if I was there by myself,
Hmm.
then it's really very lonely. I couldn't even run to the store,
Mm. Yeah.
if I wanted to. And
Yeah.
so caregiving has a way of really kind of isolating you in a lot of ways
Hmm.
because, if I'm there as a full-time caregiver, I'm not able to really get out with friends, even if I have them.
Hmm. Hmm.
You know, the times that I may need to talk the most is when they're sleeping or when
Hmm.
they're at work.
Hmm.
And so you are cut off to some degree from, those types of things. And it can be pretty isolating. And so, again, we have to find ways,
Yeah.
to kind of
How's,
connect. Yeah.
thank you for allowing this has been a healing journey, and I
Awesome.
appreciate it.
Awesome. You're
Thank you.
welcome. And so that concludes our conversation for this evening. I want to thank you so much again for being with us. Thank you for your engagement with us in the comments. I have a feeling that we're probably going to be back even if it's just responding to comments and asking questions. And so if you want to see us come back and have a little bit more of a conversation, then you want to let us know that you want us to do that, and then drop questions in the comment. I want to encourage you to purchase the book if you have not. And if you have, do me a huge favor, leave a review on Amazon. All of those things are going to help us to get the book into the hands of those who really need it. And as I continue to have conversations with people, I'm learning more and more how much this is needed. So if you will do that and help us, we would certainly appreciate it. I'm going to close here. Thank you again for joining us.